What a confluence of anniversaries it is, but I'll come to them in a minute. Andy Burnham becomes the 7th British Prime Minister in 10 years. Once upon a time, that was the Italian job. The revolving door of Italian premierships made the country a laughingstock, but they had fewer every year than we do. 7 in 10 years, and of course, unelected, as has become the traditional British way. As traditional as a bowler hat, you might say. He has organised a coup to remove the elected Prime Minister, only to promise exactly the same policies as the Prime Minister that he has replaced. What was the point of that coup, Andy? If the first person you called was Donald J. Trump, who only 5 years ago you said on Twitter yourself, anyone with any time for Donald Trump is looking like a chump this day. Well, you were right then, and you're wrong now. But what was that first phone call of your premiership about? It was to promise Donald Trump the right to fly defensive strikes of American bombers from English airfields. What a defensive strike, by the way. And when those bombers are the very heaviest of American bombers, you can be sure that on those bombers are nuclear capable. And it may very well be that this Pickaxe Mountain becomes the site of the first nuclear attack since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it will have turned out that it was launched from an English airfield under the Labour Prime Minister, Andy Burnham. Well, he will burn them, but the Iranians will burn them back. The Iranians will burn everybody back. And Andy Burnham may be the last of our prime ministers, because Great Britain may no longer exist. It's as serious as that, because the second call that Andy Burnham made, now, first one to Donald Trump, the second call that Andy Burnham made was to Volodymyr Zelensky, who, as far as I know, he's never met, but who described the plight of the beleaguered dictator in Kiev as something deeply personal to him. Well, I've been looking back to see how deeply personally involved Andy Burnham has been in support of Zelensky over the last 4 years. And virtually nothing could I find. Burnham doesn't know his. He certainly has. He was not drowning in his cups at the fall of Constantinople. He has known that there is a nuclear plant at Zaporizhzhia, which is always in danger of becoming a nuclear bomb itself, making Chernobyl, maybe he's never heard of Chernobyl either, making Chernobyl child's play by comparison. Andy Burnham knows nothing about foreign affairs. That's why in 2015, now I've known him for 25 years, in 2015, he declared himself to be a member of the Labour Friends of Israel. He hadn't thought it worth becoming in the first 15 years that he was hanging around the British House of Commons while I was there. But in 2015, he joined the Labour Friends of Israel. Why? Because he was about to run to become leader of the Labour Party. He's finally made it. Third time lucky. How's that for opportunism? He discovered he was a friend of Israel just before he launched his leadership campaign. It was bad timing, though, because the winner was somebody called Jeremy Corbyn, who ran on a pro-Palestine ticket in the wake of the atrocities of the 2014 war on Gaza, when everyone was swinging towards Palestine, and he knew that it was in his best interests in the long term to join the Labour Friends of Israel. And infamously, during that leadership election campaign, he declared that if elected leader of the Labour Party, the first foreign visit that he would make would be to Israel. So, and is not really a man of the world. Well, fair play. If that means he's going to concentrate on the home front, nobody will be happier than me and my party, the Workers' Party of Britain. We do what it says on the tin, which is the best for the working people of our own country, which doesn't include handing over billions, hand over fist, to the little crook of Kiev, the little thief of Kiev, whose country was a byword for corruption before he even became the president, when he was still a ballet dancer playing the piano with his penis, with some difficulty, I understand. The little thief of Kiev can look forward to exactly the same largesse from the British taxpayer, says Andy Burnham, in which case, how are we going to pay for the cost of living crisis that Andy Burnham has promised to get to grips with? How are we going to pay for the reindustrialization of our deindustrialized country? How are we going to pay for an increase in the personal tax allowance? Oh no, that was yesterday. Burnham said he was going to raise the personal individual tax allowance. Today he's told Politico that actually, after all, what he said yesterday is no longer valid. He won't be doing it. But how is he going to pay for the crisis in social care in my country, the crisis in the National Health Service, the crisis in the living standards of the working class? How, when he's giving money to Zelensky? Well, the answer to that is that Zelensky will get his money and the rest of the people of Britain will get nout. Well, not quite nout. His first announcement was that he was going to cut the VAT on domestic energy costs. Great, I thought. Exactly what's needed in the middle of a heat wave. Exactly what's needed when you took your party, your government, took the winter fuel allowance from Britain's old age pensioners as a first act of Keir Starmer's premiership, who the next day gave precisely the same amount of money saved by the former to Zelensky. And Zelensky later was promised 100 years of £3 billion per year. Well, in the call to Zelensky, Andy Burnham told him, it's deeply personal for me. You can be sure that nothing will change in Britain's policy towards Ukraine. And as I say, what was the point then? If we're going to do exactly what Keir Starmer was doing, what's the reason for overthrowing an elected Prime Minister and replacing him with an unelected one? Even though that has become the British way. But turning to the confluence of anniversaries, in Warsaw on this day, in Paris on this day, the trains began leaving from Jewish ghetto in Warsaw and from the captive Jews in Paris, sent east to Treblinka and other death camps, where on arrival, on selection, meaning everybody over 45 was sent one way to their gas chambers, being told They were going for a shower after their long journey, and those under 45 were sent a different way to be tattooed and set to work as slave labor. On that very day, Donald Trump has been announcing hourly on Truth Social, on social media, blatant, brazen threats of war crimes of exactly the kind that were outlawed in the Nuremberg Tribunal. It is a war crime, ipso facto, with no argument, to bomb people's electricity, to bomb people's water, to bomb bridges used for civilians to go about their daily life. It is ipso facto a war crime punishable, according to the Nuremberg Tribunal, by the death penalty, by being hanged by the noose until you are dead. Donald Trump is hourly promising that very fate to the 93 million people of Iran on the day that the people of Menab began to bury not their children. I'm sorry to put it this way. I hope Professor Morandi isn't listening. Bury not their children. Bury the fragments of their children. Bury the skin and the nails of their children. Bury the parts of them identified only by DNA, for no other identification was possible. I just saw an interview with a woman whose son, I can hardly say it, whose son's flesh was identified sticking to the missile, the American cruise missile. He was her son when he went to school that morning. He was flesh sticking to a missile by the lunch period. And this animal, Trump, continues to threaten and to execute blatant war crimes against, for what? For Israel. That's Iran's big crime. Its big crime is that it alone has never forgotten Gaza. It alone has never abandoned the Palestinian people. It alone will never accept the European settler apartheid state that they call Israel, about which I now turn. It is the 80th anniversary of the largest and most successful terrorist attack upon the British government in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, when, dressed as Arabs, of course, by way of deception, they make war then and now, a group led by the future Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, blew up the British headquarters in Jerusalem, killing 92 of our people.